Hey everyone, it's Tony D and Little Joan with a hot take on what else? The coronavirus. Um, so today's developments, there was a woman in Japan who was on the cruise who apparently did get sick, was diagnosed with the corona, then recovered, and then got sick again. So this is a big development in that they're worried that the virus may be multiphasic, in that you may get sick and then get better and then get sick again. It could be that it lies dormant in you and then comes back at certain times. Nobody's really sure. There have been more cases. There are, I think, 60 cases in Boston. They're quarantined people, meaning that they were somewhere and they got quarantined for their own safety and the safety of others around them. So, at the very least, I think, even though the United States is going to get sick, just like everywhere else, because they don't really have this quarantine, the fact that we have the best measures in place means that we're slowing the pace of the disease down a bit. There's nothing really going to slow the stewardess, which I talked about yesterday, who was in LA. She's inadvertently infected hundreds of people. There's just no way around that. I mean, she's in a confined space with dozens of people on every flight and worked probably a good 2 weeks before she was diagnosed, and during that time spread infection everywhere. You know, that's like 12 monkeys level of infection. And it's all over the country. So anybody who flew to LA and back, could potentially have been on a plane with this woman. And she must have gotten it from somebody. That person, good chance, they were on the plane for whatever reason. So a lot of infection going around. They're not going to stop it. The other problem is, too, since it's so similar to the flu, if you get a mild case of it, you're probably not going to be diagnosed as having the coronavirus. You're probably going to be diagnosed, oh, well, you got the flu, why don't you go home? Here's a prescription and take cough medicine and blah, blah, blah. The usual stuff you get from your doctor. So, and then meanwhile, you're spreading it around too. Because, when you get sick, you still go places. You still go to the store. You still, you try not to go a lot of places, but depending on your situation. Now, obviously, if you have someone to take care of you, maybe they run your errands for you. But, if it's just you and doggy, you're going to have to, pop out and get some soup and get some medicine or whatever. That's why it's good to have a little bit of a supply. And if you haven't gone out and gotten your supplies, now is the time. The weekend's here. People are going to go out on Saturday and they're going to go bananas. I've been wearing my mask out in public for a couple of weeks now. Mostly got comments and jokes, all in good fun. I didn't take it to heart or anything. But today was interesting because someone came up to me and said, when I first saw you in that mask, I thought you were out of your mind. Now, I know you were ahead of the curve. So, and then I actually yesterday ran into two people, a Chinese couple, I believe, who were already wearing the mask. So it's happening, people. It's happening. Time to get some masks if you haven't gotten them already. They're probably sold out, but you can get the cheap ones like I got. But the main thing is to limit your exposure. Don't go out unless you absolutely have to. The other big news, the Israelis are close to a cure. I think I said that. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the political ramifications of the virus and the economic ones. I kind of didn't even think of the economic ones while I was running out and buying my stuff, other than my immediate situation. But then I read an article on Zero Hedge about some stocks losing like $5 trillion worth of value as people are panicking. This could cause a global recession. A couple of reasons. Number one, the Chinese are desperately trying to tell everybody they're fine and that business can go on as usual. The truth is, if this virus is as deadly and as prevalent as it seems, and when I mean deadly, I mean a 2% death rate, which isn't high, but is high for a virus that is this infectious, way higher than the flu. If you're talking a billion people, if 100 million people get the virus, 2% of them die. That's 2 million people. If a billion people get the virus, then you're talking 20 million. And I believe China has 1.3 or 1.6 billion people now. So, you're looking at close to 30 million people just in China dying over the course of, I don't know, the next couple of months, on top of the fact that they could die for reasons unrelated to the virus and die from simple lack of medical care, of the system being overwhelmed. So you could have a situation where there's so many bodies, they can't stack them high enough. And while that's happening, their society, the entire Chinese system could finally crumble. This could finally destroy communist China as we know it. If this happens, the first thing is that a lot of countries, especially the United States, have a lot of trade with China. We're pretty much prepared to deal with it at this point because we just had a tariff war with them. So, it's not gonna be much for us to go right kind of back to that. Some of the pundits I've watched have, not that it won't impact us, but I don't think it'll impact us as hard as they're predicting. I think what will happen is certain goods won't be available, certain goods will increase in price, and we may, experience a downturn in the economy probably for the next 6 months to a year until the markets adjust. And they will adjust. Because it's not like this just happened to China or just happened to the United States. It's happening worldwide. So it kind of evens it all out. It's not like China's going to lose 30 million people and we're not going to lose any. We're going to lose 2%, which would be like, 7 million people. So, worldwide, it's kind of a wash. And yes, supply lines will be disrupted, but eventually, though, they won't be. Eventually, everybody will recover from the virus. I think the likeliest scenario is we will all develop a natural immunity to the virus, even if it's multiphasic or whatever. And then after that, there may be additional vaccines to strengthen your immune system. But if this is as strong as they're saying it is, it's gonna be mostly on us to recover. Now, politically in the United States, a lot of the Democrats seem to be blaming Trump, and I think this is probably one of the worst strategies they could possibly employ. Here's why. Nobody believes Donald Trump started the coronavirus. We're talking about a virus that erupted in Wuhan, a city that has a level 4 biolab in China. The Chinese essentially acquired these viruses from Canada. I don't think they acquired them illegally, but the fact that they had this lab and the fact that they were working on these diseases, they still don't know if it was a weapon, and the Chinese are pretty tight-lipped about it. You wouldn't expect them to give that up. If that's the case, or even if it's not, until we get the proof, China's kind of in the doghouse, with the rest of the world. Nobody's going to be like, oh yeah, China, you're a buddy. Everybody's going to be like, hey, China, we're still burying people. Thanks a lot, a-holes. So they're going to be on everybody's S list for a long time if unless they provide a good explanation that, oh, we were just studying these diseases and it was an accident. And once we get past the point that the economic damage that's going to occur, like right now, a lot of the other countries that are dependent upon China are sort of covering for them a little bit because they don't want the economy of China to collapse, because then it'll sort of domino into the rest of us a little bit. But once we're past that point, once we're past the point of no return, everybody knows, and we're all in a recession anyway, there's no point in propping up China, and then it'll be like, well, F you. F you for what you did. You screwed us. We lost all this money, and now we're taking our factories elsewhere. We're either going to outsource them or start doing them in-house more. With the United States, I think this may be why Trump just did this huge visit to India and cut a big deal with them. So, he may be looking to India to be a bigger trading partner and to bring back jobs in the United States. If they could loosen up some of the restrictions more and revitalize some areas in our country, some of the things that they made in China that we're dependent on, especially medicine. I was shocked to find out how much medicine is actually made in China as well. I assumed, a lot of stuff's made in China, but usually when you think of made in China, you think, crappy toys and plastics and, stuff that when you make it, there's a lot of pollution, nobody wants to make it. You don't think of like important life-saving drugs that I'm sure they have some biohazards, as a result of their manufacture. But you wouldn't think it would be that bad, and you would think, for something that important, we'd at least have some of it made here. Simply not the case. So the weird blessing in disguise, if there's any in this, what might be that, as a country, we may reevaluate sending all our manufacturing overseas. That maybe it's a little dangerous to be so dependent upon one country to make everything in case there is an instance like this. But I think the Democrats trying to blame Trump for the virus, what a terrible, terrible move this is. Can you imagine a relative or someone close to you dying from the virus, and then you have to hear that? It smacks of very crass political, I don't know what you'd call it, hackneyed stuff. I mean, Trump obviously didn't create the virus. He wouldn't want it. And to see, it all started with Bill Maher cheering for a recession on the show. Some people are now sort of cheering the virus. They're cheering on the fact we may dip into a recession as a result of this. None of those people are going to reap any kind of reward from that. And in fact, quite the opposite. People will remember down the road, if they're even remotely connected into politics, oh, you're one of the people that roots against us. I didn't like George Bush, but I didn't want to see him fail because he ran the country I lived in and live in. I didn't like Barack Obama. I didn't want to see him fail. He ran the country I was living in. Same thing with Trump. Whatever you think of Trump, maybe you don't like him, maybe you want to see him gone, but he runs the country. You don't want to hurt the country just to get rid of him, do you? I mean, seriously? Would you like to see people hurt and lose their jobs and maybe die just so you can say, ha ha ha, finally no more Donald Trump? I mean, it seems a bit extreme. And so when you have people sort of cheering like that, it's inappropriate. So it's kind of a downer, and I think it's bad enough the Bernie Bros, are calling for gulags and re-educating Trump supporters, and they're doing all sorts of really extreme, radical things. This kind of stuff seems to be par for the course for them. So you're not going to make any friends doing that. As Rahm Emanuel said, never let a crisis go to waste. But I thought that was very crass and rude as well. And I certainly wouldn't vote for him, judging by what he's done to Chicago. So you want to root for Trump? I mean, this nonsense about him cutting funding for the CDC, right as we have the virus, that doesn't make any sense. So first off, if you cut funds, that happens like in a budget in the future. It doesn't happen like they don't show up at the CDC's door and say, "Hey, give us $500,000. We've cut your budget." It's not what happens. So these reports of like, "Oh, well, he cut the budget," blah blah blah. It's not true. It's not what happened. You can't, and you can't blame Trump for the virus. You just can't. If anything, you'd have to blame the State Department not heeding his request not to have the infected patients from the cruise ship brought into the United States. Now, I don't have a problem with that because, they were in Japan, and Japan has fine medical facilities, and they were already there. So, and it was a Japanese cruise ship. So they could get proper medical care there. So they weren't, it's not like they're going to get different care here. Granted, they'd be home and blah, 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 but they can't go home. They're infected. So what would be the difference if those 14 people had stayed in Japan to recover over the next month or so and then return when they're cured? I mean, that seems a lot smarter to me. An ocean can really protect us from the virus. Now there's a rumor that some of the people handling those contaminated cruise passengers, and by handling I mean escorting them on and off different vehicles and into facilities, they weren't properly equipped and or briefed or whatever. So it looks like they may have been infected, and on and on and on. But at this point, I think it's pretty obvious that they can't quarantine this virus. They just can't quarantine it. And it is likely it's going to be pandemic. I mean, they've already said that. It's just going to happen. So I don't think there would have been any, unless Trump had cut off all ties to everywhere, everywhere from Asia, like all flights from Asia grounded. We're not going to take anybody back until this is over. Maybe would have had a shot, maybe. But that's just not realistic in an open society like the United States. It's not going to happen. And in fact, when he did close down flights to China, people got upset. So, people don't really get it until they get this and start to feel bad. A friend of a friend has I'll just wrap up with this sort of gruesome story. A friend of a friend has a good friend in China who has the coronavirus, and he's trapped in his apartment trying to wait it out, and he's sick, and he says it feels like it slowly creeps up on you, kind of like the flu, and then one day you're just, you're gasping for air, and it fills your lungs, and it feels like your chest is heavy, and he's had to get up and walk around the room just to sort of keep himself going. And he's very tired and exhausted, and he doesn't know how, some of these older people would deal with it. But he sounds determined to beat it, but at the same time, he does sound very sick and not having a good time. So I think we have to all expect to be out of commission for a good 2 to 4 weeks. And our entire way of life is just going to grind to a halt for a little while until we can get back on our feet. And I think we will. We just got to all work together and not freak out. So don't freak out, okay?